Well, this episode of Word in Your Ear is supported by Packed Coffee, who rather wonderfully post their fragrant and sumptuous wares to your home address in packages that drop through the letterbox. And they've just sent us some powerfully accelerating brews with all the range and flavour you'd normally apply to wine. As they so rightly point out, some of these have top notes of pink grapefruit or
I
cherry
noticed that.
and black currant. Yeah, did you? Unmissable.
Yes, unprompted.
Unprompted. Yeah.
Top notes of pink grapefruit. No, it's
one
very
of them
good.
has tutti frutti and sweets. No, it's otherworldly stuff, and no mistake. Great songs about coffee, Dave. The White Stripes version of Dylan's One More Cup of Coffee, almost better than the original, I'm saying.
Fighting talk there.
Fighting talk. The White Stripes is good. The Java Jive by the Ink Spots.
Absolutely. Can't
That's
go wrong with
an
the
early
Ink Spots.
celebration of the energising properties of the new Wonder Bean and its value for anyone on the dance floor. But another wonderful tune. Do you know Coffee Blues by Mississippi John Hurd?
I do, actually. It's from his 1928 Avalon recordings. I even know that. It's really good. I love that record.
It's so funny. And it just reminded me, there was a very different attitude towards advertising back then. It's all out in the open. Do you remember the days of the early Ed Sullivan show when he'd bring on a representative from their sponsors, Lipton Instant Tea?
Yes.
To talk about the benefits of their thirst-quenching beverage. While the Beatles or Morecambe and Wise or some ventriloquist or plate spinner loafed about in the wings. Totally different. And this is just such a great song because John Hurt talks about, it's a classic old blues nudge wink, isn't it? It's a thing about a loving spoonful.
It's apparently not coffee at all. Yeah,
not coffee, apparently. Exactly. Ask John Sebastian. And and he's kind of wrapped it up in this unapologetic ad for instant coffee. And it starts, "This is Coffee Blues. I likes a certain brand. Maxwell House. It's good till the last drop. Just like it says on the can. If I can get me just a spoonful of Maxwell House, do me as much good as 2 or 3 cups of this other coffee." It's good, isn't it? It's
very good.
It's the way he tells them. And we're saying that Pact will do you as much good as 2 or 3 cups of other coffee. So if you fancy taking advantage of this deal, and let's be honest, it's a corker, go to packedcoffee.com. That's PACT coffee.com, where you will get 50% off your first and third orders. And you
have to enter a code, don't you?
Yeah,
Mark?
you've got to put in the code. You have to use, there's a flexible coffee subscription. You enter your code, your ear.
Your ear.
YOUREAR. Your ear. 15 different flavors delivered direct through the letterbox. That address again, and all the info at packedcoffee.com. Give it a whirl, the loving spoonful. And now, back to the show.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Do you remember the Queen's last Jubilee with the musical component? Do you remember that show outside Buckingham Palace? Didn't Stevie Wonder play? Stevie Wonder was fantastic, was it, on that occasion?
He was.
And was that, I think it was the same
Cliff
thing
Richard, probably almost inevitably.
Possibly.
Is it the one where Brian May played on the roof, or that's a different one?
I think he probably did. That may be a different one, actually. And Madness did Our House on the top of Buckingham Palace.
Was good. That was good.
It was all really good. I'll tell you what, Stevie Wonder was fantastic, because if you're going to pick somebody to, entertain a mass audience from children to pensioners, Stevie Wonder's about as good as you can get, isn't he? Because everybody knows all those tunes. Anyway, there's obviously a major one coming up soon. I think Ed Sheeran's playing it, isn't he?
That's right, he is. Yeah.
But I thought, if we were doing it, okay, and you've got your pick of any artist, everybody's still alive, okay? Yeah, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to take a performer from each decade. The Queen has been on the throne, right? So we're going from the 1950s, right through to the present day, okay? You got to take a UK performer from each of those decades to sum up that decade and be kind of
anyone you want, right? Fantasy.
Put before a queen, okay? So we're going to start with the 1950s, okay? Who are you going to choose, Mark Allen, for the 1950s?
Right, 1950s. Well, there's various possibilities, Joe Brown or the Shadows, but the man surely would be Lonnie Donegan. Don't you think? Okay. Lonnie Donegan. Rock Island Line, 1955. You know, the digging my potatoes, that kind of seaside postcard sauce, that kind of when I'm cleaning windows sauce. Also, he couldn't be more 50s Britain. Do you think? Kind of austerity, skiffle, tea-chest base, washboards,
over to you, Alex.
Dustman.
Over to you, Alex, for 1950s. Because you remember the 1950s like it was yesterday. Go on.
I remember them well.
Go on.
Absolutely. Well, for me, it was a toss-up, actually, between Cliff and the Shads, which I felt was a little bit too obvious, actually.
Right.
So I plumped for Tommy Steele in the end.
Good, that's good.
Britain's first rock and roll star. Felt.
Is he gonna play rock with the caveman, or is he gonna do flashbang wallop what a picture? Which bit of Tommy Steele are you going for? You're probably not sufficiently familiar with Tommy Steele to say that. Okay, so you've said Lonnie Donegan and Tommy Steele. I'm going the other way. Do you know who I'm choosing for the 1950s? Noel Coward.
Oh,
wow.
The Noel Coward who recorded in the middle of the 1950s, one of the great live LPs, which I commend to the community, which is Noel Coward at Las Vegas, not in Las Vegas, at Las Vegas, which is one of the great kind of one-man shows where he does all these wonderful tunes. So Noel Coward.
What a great idea. Yeah, again, none more British. Fantastic.
What a genius. And he was there, and that's great. Okay, moving on to the 60s. Mark Ellen, who's it going to be? Jerry and the Pacemakers, obviously.
It was going to be Fairport Convention, all small faces, but I went for the Kinks. It's got to be the Kinks. Right. Kinks, the big collared shirts, you know, the swinging London, Carnaby Street, the frock coats, riding boots, general kinkiness. Dedicated follower of fashion, you know, hips. They kind of summed up to me that kind of moment in the mid-60s when England was absolutely at the top of its game. And
I think actually wasn't Waterloo Sunset? Wasn't that? No, it wasn't. I'm trying to think. The Kinks had a number one record when England won the World Cup. Isn't that right? I think they did.
Maybe,
somebody can go and check that. Anyway,
yeah.
Like, so would you have for the 1960s?
I think there's only one answer to this question, and it has to be the Beatles. It just has to be.
And I would support you because the Beatles would be my choice as well. Okay, so we win in that case. Okay.
You won.
All right.
Beatles 2, Kinks 1.
Moving on to the 1970s. Who is in the 1970s, Michael?
Well, again, ELO or the Faces, but I went in the end, and this is controversial. I went in the end for somebody who summed up pub rock. They summed up pints in dimpled jugs, pork pies, the smell of the public bar, the sticky lino, the ashtrays, and it was Dr. Feelgood. Just their names, Sparko, the big figure, Zebrillo, Wilco. You know, there's something about that which couldn't be more British, really. A man who wears a white suit in order to roll around like on a sticky lino floor, you know. Okay. A guitarist who machine guns the audience. I'd say Dr. Feelgood. That's mine.
Alex, what about you?
Well, I felt the quintessential band of the 70s was the quintessential British band of the 70s. Sorry, it had to be Slade. I was tempted to say The Clash just because I'd like to see Joe Strummer play at Buck Palace. However, I thought that Slade would be perfectly bridged that gap between acceptable establishment entertainment and something that was a little bit more edgy.
Okay, so it's Dr. Feelgood, Slade. My nomination is Roxy Music.
Oh, good. That's nice.
You know, just is. You know, everybody liked Roxy Music in some shape or form. So, okay, all good suggestions. Moving on to the 1980s. Who is in the 1980s, Mark?
I was wrestling with Kate Bush and the Smiths, but I went in the end for Pet Shop Boys.
That's what I've done as well.
Did you? How funny. Well, we're right. Because Pet Shop Boys, Neil Tennant always talks about that being their kind of imperial phase, their kind of their big hits. And it's so summed up that particular moment of kind of glorious 80s economic prosperity and general sense of the boom, don't you think? And they're so funny. They're so funny and satirical and quirky and idiosyncratic, and the way Neil pronounces everything in very much in English, not American. I think they're uniquely British and they're fabulous.
That's true. So Mark and I have both gone for Pet Shop Boys. Alex, who is it for you?
However hard I tried, I just couldn't get away from the Smiths, I'm afraid.
Okay.
That's fair enough.
Okay. Even though they recorded the record called The Queen is Dead. But,
yeah,
okay.
Well.
Yeah, okay, fine. All right. So, okay, 2 votes for the Pet Shop Boys, 1 for the Smiths. Moving on to the 90s, who's it going to be? Mark?
My runners-up, Pulp, Chemical Brothers, Kirsty MacColl, Stone Roses. But the winner, Kirsty MacColl, of course, recording Electric Landlady in that decade. But my winner of the 90s actually was the KLF. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I just know they made such fantastic records. The kind of music is a kind of guerrilla art statement, you know. And who would ever have imagined that the former manager of Echo and the Bunnymen and the Teardrop Explodes, plus the bloke who did the poster for Athena of Lord of the Rings, would eventually finish up, you know, making a record with Tammy Wynette, who, interestingly, they thought was Dolly Parton. They got the wrong person. They thought she was Dolly Parton. Left a dead sheep at the Brit Awards and supposedly burnt £1 million. A lot of it was just kind of insane, eccentric, British kind of publicity making, and I thought they were just wonderful. And those records, What Time Is Love, 3 a.m. Eternal, Justified and Ancient, you know, just great records. A big soundtrack of the 90s for me.
So what about you, Alex?
Well, it was tempting to go along the lines of Oasis having defined the 90s. However, I thought about this and I decided that, in fact, the group that defined the 90s was, in fact, the Spice Girls, who
that's what I've got on my list as well.
That's good.
Oh wow!
That's when pop music turned female.
Yeah, Spice Girls,
and it's been female ever since. Actually, you know, all the big stars since have been female.
Yeah.
So no, I wouldn't disagree with you there. So moving on to the next decade, which is the first decade of the current century. The 2000s, Mark.
Well, I don't know. I thought it was very long and hard, and I thought in the grand tradition of The Girl Next Door, which is a British thing, the kind of Alison Moyet, Lulu, Scylla, Adele, you know, a singer is a complete opposite of what American stars tend to be like. They're always polished and controlled and manicured and fiercely marketed. I went for Amy Winehouse. I just thought she was just terrific. Those records were huge hits. There was something about her kind of suburban life and life in Camden, and I thought she was terrific. And you know, it all ended in tears, but she was terrific.
Okay, well, in this show, it doesn't end in tears.
No, it doesn't.
It's a fantasy. Alex, who is it for you?
Well, actually, I went for Amy Winehouse as well. I thought there was no other choice really. It was Amy or nothing.
I was going with Lily Allen, but okay, I'll give you Amy Winehouse. Okay,
good choice.
So moving to the 2010s, the 2010s. Who is it then? Alex.
Well, Alex, go
on, Alex.
It has to be Ed Sheeran.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. He's there anyway. Okay, difficult to argue against Ed Sheeran, isn't it? Mark Ellen, who is it?
God, I was really stuck, actually. Ed Sheeran's, he's obvious. I quite like him. You know, I went for Wolf Alice, actually. He's just one of the groups from that particular period I really like. I love groups. I love male groups with a girl singer, and there's something about them. They're very Glastonbury, just a great sound. They're very charismatic, but I mean, they're not. They're probably not big enough, actually, and well known enough and international.
I would actually propose. I propose you've got to have Adele, and you've probably got to have
Adele.
You've got to have Adele singing "We'll Meet Again."
Yeah, good.
It's got a modern Vera Lynn figure.
She is.
Okay, in the current decade, and finally bringing it right up to date. Who is it from the current decade, Alex?
Okay, it has to be. Absolutely has to be Wet Leg.
Oh,
Wet Leg. Okay. Who are absolutely the band of the decade already. In fact, it's pointless anybody releasing any new music from this point because it just won't be as good as Chaise Long.
Okay, so the final, the climactic act in the Queen's latest Jubilee will be, ladies and gentlemen, Wet Leg.
Yes, the world beat Wet Leg. Thank you and good night.
The Word Podcast, 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
This Word in Your Ear is brought to you in part by NordVPN. VPN stands for what, Mark Ellen? What's it stand for?
Virtual Private Network.
There it
is.
There you are. I'm going to say it again. What does VPN stand for, Mark?
It stands for Virtual Private Network.
And that is the way to keep your data safe on the internet, whether you're logging in either at home or abroad. It protects your identity and encrypts your data so that nobody can steal your identity or your data. And at the same time, this enables you, NordVPN, to access the internet via servers in more than 50 different countries. So when you log on, you can say, where do I fancy being today? South Korea or Sweden? Where do I feel like it? And you can often sidestep region restrictions that restrict what you might watch in various different territories. And you can stream movies and TV programs from all over the world. This means, in my case, Mark, I need never be separated from the two films that I seem to spend most of my time watching. I'm going to try you on these.
Go on. I like this. So these are films that you watch like once a year or that kind of thing?
I just watch them again and again.
I think I know which one of these is, but go on.
No, I don't think you do, actually, because they're both films about, they cater to the male fascination with just how things work, okay? And one is The Big Short. Have you ever seen The Big Short?
I've never seen it. No.
Well, let me recommend it to you. It's not a masterpiece, but I must have watched it about 30 times. It stars Steve Carell Christian Bale and Brad Pitt's in it. And it's basically about, it's based on a Michael Lewis book about people who bet against the housing market in the United States. They saw the 2008 crash coming, and they did very well out of it. And that's one film. And the other one, which also features Brad Pitt, again, not a masterpiece of a film, but I must have watched it 30 times, is Moneyball. Have you ever seen Moneyball?
That's another film I haven't seen.
Mark,
I'm writing this down.
You got your weekend sorted out for you.
This is good.
The Big Short and Moneyball. Moneyball, Brad Pitt plays, again, a true story. And again, based on a best-selling book, he plays Billy Beane, who's the manager of the Oakland A's baseball team, who decides he's just going to do things in a very different way from the way everybody else runs a ball team. It's just going to look at people's actual performance rather than their mystique. And Brad Pitt's just got that thing that in certain parts, you could spend the rest of your life looking at him.
I know you can.
Just watching him do things, watching him talk, watching him pick up the phone. You know what I mean? Watching him put things on a whiteboard behind his desk. It's just got that
mesmerizing, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. It's like they always used to say about Cary Grant. People used to watch Cary Grant films just to see him smoke. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
It wasn't to see him hang off a cliff. It was just to see him do absolutely mundane, everyday things.
Just be Cary Grant.
With extraordinary elegance. You know the old story about...
Because you imagine you're just in a room with him, don't you? You imagine you're kind of living with him and just studying him in that kind of detail.
You heard that wonderful line of Cary Grant where he said, all men want to be Cary Grant. He said, I want to be Cary Grant, which I think says a lot about the nature of film startup. Anyway, The Big Short and Moneyball. There's your weekend for you, Mark Ellen.
Perfect.
NordVPN. You can take advantage of a deal where you can try NordVPN by going to nordvpn.com/yourear, or just use the code yourear to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan and one additional month for free, and also a bonus gift. So it's risk-free because there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. Full details underneath in the show notes.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So I went to a gig, Mark, this week at the invitation of our friend of the podcast, Kerry Shale. Kerry had arranged this some while back. He said, let's go and see the Hot Club of Cowtown. And they're playing Cecil Sharp House. I haven't been to Cecil Sharp House for a long time. That is
fantastic place.
As we all
panelled acoustics. Oh, it's gorgeous.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I agree how gorgeous it is, but it's certainly it's the 1950s, undoubtedly, in Cecil Sharp House. But anyway, the advantage of it is that it wasn't kind of allocated seating. So Cary said, "Do you want to go and sit at the front?" So I said, "Yeah, let's go and sit at the front." So we sat at the front, and it's a low stage, and it's a very kind of low pressure gig. And so if you're sitting at the front, you can exclude the rest of the audience from your experience, of the whole evening. You're just looking at the act on stage. It's a little bit as if they're playing in a corner of your living room, which is very nice. And there are 3 pieces. They're based in Austin, Texas, I think. But there's a guy who plays bass.
So and the name, is there a combination of it's an echo of Stefan Grappelli, isn't it, and Django Reinhardt, Hot Club of Paris, and also Bob Wills, presumably, isn't it? Cowtown?
Well, yes. Okay, so yes, they are. They do indeed echo Django Reinhardt, Stefan Grappelli, because she plays the fiddle, Ilana James plays the fiddle, and Whit Smith plays the guitar, and then they have a bass player. One of these bass players who joined quite recently and looks so much a character, in the way that members of American groups do, that you kind of, you always think to yourself, what have you been doing in the rest of your life before you joined that group? You can't possibly have been in any other group. You know what I mean? Yeah. American musicians kind of look the part.
Completely.
So, but the two kind of stars are Ilana James. She's played with Bob Dylan and all sorts of people, and Whit Smith played the guitar. And I have to say, having observed them closely for a couple of hours, I have never in my life seen virtuosity worn so lightly as in the case of the Hot Club of Cowtown. Because they're both just fantastic musicians, but yet they're playing.
But they don't make a big deal of it.
They don't make a.
They
big
don't do
deal
that kind of look at me showing off, and look at my.
Because you can't do it with Western swing music. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of tricky. Everybody knows it's tricky, but it's there for fun. It's there for enjoyment. And also there's a brevity which built into the whole mechanic, which stops it ever getting self-indulgent. The brevity is so much part of the DNA of Western swing that more than once during the set, when they were starting some kind of mad fiddle tune or whatever, Orange Blossom Special or I don't know what, they would say, "See you at the end. See you in 3 minutes," because everything they play is 3 minutes long. Yeah. And they do Autumn Leaves, and they do the Continental, and they do I don't think they did My Window Faces the South, but they do Take Me Back to Tulsa, I'm Too Young to Marry, all that kind of thing. So there's that side of them that absolutely fascinated me, that they were just ridiculously great musicians. But it was worn so lightly, and it was just done in the cause of entertainment. And the other thing that I was thinking about, I particularly thinking about when you're on the front row and you're just looking at them very closely. And I want to know if you've ever done this, Mark, during watching musical performances. Generally, musical performances where there's a male and a female, where you kind of were thinking after the third or fourth number, I wonder if they're sleeping with each other. Have you ever? Come on, be honest. Be honest. Repeatedly. Have you thought that? Yeah, I mean, you do, don't you?
Because, I mean, I don't wish this to be in any way misinterpreted, but girls in groups nearly always were in a relationship with another member of the band, weren't they? I can remember going to see Bonnie Raitt in about 1977, and her bass player was a guy called Freebo. Freebo. Guy with a kind of Frank Zappa-like moustache and a huge kind of afro. And she'd always go about my man, Freebo, And from that point, I started to think all girls, because girls, often if you're a musician, the only people you can have any kind of social life with are the people you're actually traveling with.
Yeah.
You think about it, her and, I don't know, Chrissy Hine, Debbie Harry, Kim Wilde, Grace Slick, Tina Weymouth, Lucinda Williams. You know, nearly all. I mean, most female musicians were.
But the point is whether they are or they aren't. You can't help thinking about it. Anyway, in the case
you look for their looks between them because you can read so much into a look.
You get a little bit of wait till I get you home.
That's right, exactly.
Somebody messes up an intro or whatever. But actually, in the case of the Hot Club of Cowtown, they're not. They're not an item at all. And he mentioned, Whit Smith actually mentioned his wife's name at some point while introducing a song. And I thought, nobody does that by accident in a show, do they?
No.
Refer to a member of the family. It's done quite deliberately.
To make it absolutely clear, there's nothing going on. Entirely professional relationship.
And anyway, then she, you know, they're doing oldies, but they also do their own songs, and very much in the Western swing idiom. And she introduced one of hers. She said, which was about kind of boyfriend. I can't remember the exact expression she used. It was about boyfriends who didn't last the pace or whatever, you know. And the song is called, and you like this, Mark, it's called Near Misses, spelled MRS.
Oh,
Near
really
Misses.
Good.
Isn't that good? That's really good.
Near Misses. That's so funny.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So 2 stories from the early days of rock and roll, actually from slightly pre the early days of rock and roll, before it had a name, which is kind of interesting in itself. I'm just rereading about Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, the great songwriting team who went on to write Hound Dog and I think probably Jailhouse Rock and, you know, loads of hits for the Coasters and all kinds of people. Ended up producing Steelers Wheel, didn't they? Didn't they produce? I think they produced
Stuck in the Middle
with You.
I think
Anyway, very early on, they were both. One was born in New York, one was born somewhere in the middle of the country, and then their families both moved to Los Angeles. And they met each other in Los Angeles, and they were like 14, 15-year-old kids who were just obsessed with you know, rhythm and blues, as it would have been called at the time. They were obsessed with the performers who were known as blues shouters. Do you know why they were known as blues shouters, Mark?
Go on. I can guess, I think, but go on.
Well, they performed without microphones. So they just had to be heard over whatever band they were playing with, you know. So volume was the key thing. Anyway, Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller were really keen on this kind of stuff. I used to go to every gig that they possibly could and ingratiate themselves with radio station people and get backstage. And they started writing songs. And so they would go to gigs and try and get backstage and pitch these songs to, to very often middle-aged rhythm and blues entertainers. It must have been quite intimidating in their way, you know, for young chaps. From high
these
school.
upstarts, exactly.
Yeah. And anyway, the first song that Leiber and Stoller sold, it was sold to they particularly liked people like Charles Brown and Jimmy Witherspoon. They sold their first song to Jimmy Witherspoon when they were 16 years old, okay? And do you know what the song was called?
Go on.
It was called Real Ugly Woman. It just really makes me laugh. The idea of a couple of 16-year-olds going, "We got a song for you, Mr. Witherspoon."
Standing there in their shorts.
Was it called Boy?
Conquering Pocket.
Real Ugly Woman.
That's a hit. It's got hit written all over it.
Anyway, he bought it. So that was how they got their start.
Incredible.
I love that idea.
So origin of the phrase rock and roll?
Well, yeah.
Because there's various theories, aren't there? The first evidence, I think, of the words rock and roll are in Rocket for Me by Ella Fitzgerald, 1939. Now, it's true that once upon a time the opera was the thing, but today the rage is rhythm and rhyme. So won't you satisfy my soul with rock and roll? But there's another theory, which I don't, again, it's a naval thing, that that ships, if they pitched backwards and forwards, were rocking, and if they rolled from side to side, they were rolling. And sailors would come to port looking for the place to drink in their supercharged 2 or 3 days off. And they would talk about particular joints, particular taverns or bars or whatever. So is it rocking and rolling? Meaning, is it absolutely chaotic?
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it might be. I've really got no idea, but I don't know where that expression comes from.
Well, it's funny.
It's kind of euphemism for sex.
Alan Freed is often the person who goes into the history books as being the person who kind of popularized the term. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that, because what's really interesting, and here it connects with, if you've got that Ian Hunter record where he does a song called Cleveland Rocks, and Cleveland was where Alan Freed came from. And that song, the Ian Hunter song, starts with a recording of Alan Freed talking to his audience, who say, and he describes himself as, "This is Alan Freed, king of the Moondoggers." And he used to do a program called Moondog Matinee, which again, the band made an album called Moondog Matinee, didn't they? Years later. And he used to call it Moondog music. And what he meant really was it was generally black rhythm and blues, or blues shouters, very much the same kind of thing that Leiber and Stoller out the West Coast had been enthusing about. But it was played for a mixed audience. There were white kids as well as black kids. So he called it Moondog music until, and I never realized it.
Sued by Moondog, wasn't he?
He was sued.
Louis Hardin.
Louis Moondog Hardin. This is just, talk about it's a mighty long way down rock and roll. These things just all link up over the years. People were familiar with Moondog was an eccentrically dressed street performer who used to perform his music on the streets of New York, but was also quite a serious composer, avant-garde composer, and made a load of albums on Columbia in the late 60s. So Louis Moondog Hardin. So he took legal action against Alan Freed to stop him trading under the name Moondog. So
he had to change the name of the program, didn't he?
He had to change. So by then he'd moved to WINS in New York, and that's when, for the first time, faced with the threat of Lee Lesham from Louis Moondog Hardin, he called it rock and roll for the first time.
Yeah, he had a show called Rock and Roll, Alan Freed's Rock and Roll Dance Party, I think. That's right. But that's fascinating, isn't it?
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
So Sting has been saying that he can't imagine any grown man being in a band, no doubt as a way to deflect interviewers' questions about will the police ever get back together again? I think he's got a fair point.
Yeah, I do.
Don't you, Mark?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
that a band is kind of, it's no place for a grown man.
It's a teenage thing. It's a teenage thing. But his point was that it restricts your creative range, doesn't it? Which I can really understand, because which is obviously why he left the police whenever he did when he was 32 or whatever, is that if you're sitting there saying, why don't we try a song like this? It's got a bit of jazz in it, or it's got a saxophone solo or something. The other two members of the group would say, no, we're the police. This is what we play. So you're very, very compromised by having to run everything past some other people, And I thought that was fair enough. And it made me think that there were certain bands who are still going who are only still going probably because they're less successful. The Stones is a really good example. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were not successful.
Really? Absolutely.
Really, really very unsuccessful. I can't remember how many solo albums Mick Jagger's made. 3, I think, wasn't it?
3,
He did quite a bit. The Stones didn't really exist from about 1982 to 1987 because he was trying to establish himself as a solo artist and failed miserably. So they do it because that's where their commercial prospects lie, and that's what people want to see. AC/DC.
Well, we are attached to them, aren't they? We are attached to bands. We, the public, we love bands because they're about something more than music, aren't they? We look at them. We said this before, that if U2 or whatever, they go on stage, and half the value is people just look at them and go, oh, there they are.
There they are. They met when they were 16 at school, and they're still together.
They're still together.
Well, the E Street Band's the best example.
Yeah.
The E Street Band, you just think that what's so lovely is that sense of camaraderie and friendship and the bond between them, and that's almost more important than the music. It's just they exist.
Whereas the truth is that for the people inside the groups, generally a band is a really good organism. It's built for ascent, if I can put it that way. It's built to conquer an objective, to pull yourself out of obscurity and mean something.
Yeah.
And so as long as you're at that stage in your growth, all the energy goes in the right direction.
Yeah.
As soon as you've made it, the energy goes outside the group. People start to want to have a little bit of space over here and a little bit of space over there, and a bit more credit for this and a bit less credit for that, and so forth. So that's the problem that all groups have, isn't it, really? But we as the audience, we're just really attached to groups. We wish they could all be in groups forever. We
imagine
all like
ourselves
the Jam to be back together again. They'd all like the Smiths to be back together again.
We imagine ourselves as an extension of that gang. We imagine ourselves as part of them.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, and I was thinking about people who were in bands and then went on to be solo. Are there any that you preferred outside of a band?
I can't think of one. Can you?
Yeah, I can only think of one, actually. I can think of some people who I really liked them when they were in bands, and I really liked them when they were solo, kind of in equal proportions. Paul Simon, if you can call Simon and Garfunkel a band, but Paul Simon has made records, I think, possibly as good as Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh, better, I would say.
You think better? That's really interesting.
Yeah,
I think Richard Thompson, I would say probably the same. I loved that convention when he was in it, but I kind of, some of his solo records are incredible. A lot of people are worse. I think Sting was worse outside of a band. I think Lauryn Hill was worse. I think John Fogerty was infinitely worse. I think Robbie Robertson was infinitely worse, I think. And
John Fogerty is a weird one because within Creedence, he kind of did it all anyway. Yeah. But once he was doing it all on his own,
but without those others around him, it didn't seem to work.
It didn't.
I know, I couldn't agree more. No, the only person, not that it's terribly important, but the only person I actually preferred outside of Genesis, in his case, was Phil Collins. I thought Phil Collins made some really good solo singles in the early 80s, which I actually prefer to anything that Genesis ever did. But then that's my thing about Genesis. I kind of like Genesis, but I wouldn't go, I'm not in a tearing hurry to go and put a Genesis record on.
No, I think that's a fair point, because Phil Collins on his own has a greater range than Genesis, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
And it seems it's quite a narrow scene.
Yeah, he did.
Whereas Phil Collins on his own as a solo performer, he goes absolutely all over the place.
Yeah.
And so we're saying...
You Can't Hurry Love, which was brilliant, I think. It was fantastic.
So we're saying the only, let's be categorical about this, the only person that we prefer outside of a group to being in a group is Phil Collins. Simple as that.
You're listening to the Word Podcast, where the time is whenever you want it to be.
Any other business? June 18th is Paul McCartney's 80th birthday, and it's also our second Word in Your Park in Holland Park. We're very excited. We're getting quite excited about this.
Oh, it was lovely. It was so lovely last year. Yes. A little tented arena that's attached to the back of the Opera House, and it's just, and it's perfect. If it's sunny, it's absolutely gorgeous. If it's rainy, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Another event, we got a load of people, about I think 4 or 5 speakers, old mates of ours, talking about various aspects of the great Paul McCartney, and 2 of which we've announced. So one is Jeff Lloyd, who you probably know from Virgin and Absolute Radio. He also does the Beatles brunch on Absolute Radio 60s. Major McCartney expert, and very, very, very good talker, very enthusiastic guy. And the other is Andy Miller, who's been on our podcast too, and wrote The Year of Reading Dangerously, and he's the guy from the Backlisted podcast with John Mitchinson, who's also the lead singer, Dave, of Shabby Road.
Shabby Road, of course.
Shabby Road. And we did a thing, you and I did a thing with him and John Mitchinson, Backlisted, at Port Elliott Festival about 2 or 3 years ago. And he turned up in a Magical Mystery Tour tank top.
Yes,
which you can indeed
we've
buy
envied ever
online.
since.
I know, which we thought was fantastic. And he especially took a photograph of himself wearing this and holding a copy of the Magical Mystery Tour album. So that'll be really fun. We've got three other speakers to announce to
be announced in due course. But so that's June 18th at Holland Park. How should people get the tickets, Alex?
Well, there's a link in the show notes, and you can also go to wiyelondon.com, and there's a whole ticket widget on the Word Newer website.
So get your tickets and we'll see you there. And fine weather, guaranteed.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.